We are tired of war. We are tired running. We are tired begging for borrowing. We are tired of our children being raped. We are now taking this stand to secure the future of our children because we believe as custodians of society tomorrow, our children will ask us, Mama, what was your role during the crisis?
A decade later, that moment has not lost its power, and it's because of this woman here. Hi, everybody. I'm Nora O'Donnell with CBS This Morning, and it is my honor to be here with all of you and to spend time with Leymah Gbowee, who is going to teach us how to start a revolution. A Nobel Peace Laureate and the woman responsible for ending Liberia's 14-year civil war. It is an honor to speak with you tonight.
Thank you.
We saw you there facing Charles Taylor. He looks like he wants to kill you. What was that like?
Wow. First, I'm happy to be at Women in the World. I was at the first Women in the World 2 months shy of having my 7th child. Now they're 8. Don't ask me how. Well, good job, Tina. Good job, the team. You know, when we were going to see President Taylor, there was a lot of anger. I was very angry. And there was also a lot of fear. But there is a backstory there. We got there, he said he won't see us because he was sick. So then he would only see 10 of us when there were almost 2,500 of us downstairs. So I said to the guard, I'm going up and tell him off. And he was like, what? But by that time, I was on the steps, no slippers, charging up, and then someone ran ahead of me, and one guard said to me, why do you want to put us in trouble? And next thing we heard, he's coming downstairs. So he came down, we had a statement. I look at the statement, look at the women sitting out there, thought about all that we've been through in 14 years, and told myself, the statement is very sterile. I'm going to speak from my heart because through speaking from my heart, I'll probably put out there what needs to be out there. And I think that moment was just telling him, we're sick and tired of being raped. We're sick and tired of standing in line for food. We could do better. We're sick and tired of militarism and all of these different things. There was no fear. There was a lot of anger.
Mm-hmm. Part of what you did, though, was you brought Muslim and Christian women together in a way that they had never united before. And that was key, right, to getting men to the peace table. Was that the strategy?
Well, I'd like to say that one of the things that religion and all of the different things teaches us is that we have to be divided, or you need to do this, you need to do that. When we studied the Liberian War, we realized that the violence that we're experiencing had been put into clusters. Mm-hmm. So there was this Muslim rebel group, there was this other ethnic rebel group, there was this thing, and we said to ourselves, if we must do peace, we must do peace differently. We must use a strategy that no one else is using, and that is bringing everything together. When we gather the women, the first thing we ask them, if a group of men came in this room to rape, would they be asking the Muslim women to go on one side or the Christian women to go on the other side? And the answer was no. If they started shooting in this room, would a bullet pick a Christian from a Muslim? And the answer was no. So then why don't we just do peace collectively? And I think once we did it that way, no one had any complaint to say, you're being used by this group, you're being used by that group, because when they look amongst us, there were Christians, there were Muslims, there were women from all 16 ethnic groups.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, though, that men, do you think men could have united in the same way?
Hell no. hell no. The ego. It's all about the ego. It's all about the power. It's never about community. And don't get me wrong. I'm not saying women are better than men, but when women sit in a situation where they're negotiating about the peace of their country or their community, it's never about what would they benefit. It's always about the collective. With the men, it's about how powerful I'm going to be, how much money I'm going to make out of this for myself. And so I doubt if it could be replicated, you will see it happen in the Congo, you will see it happen in Central African Republic, because a lot of these wars that are happening now around the world, you will see it happen in Syria. But it's all about the ego. So hell no.
You started with just 7 women. How do you grow a movement? How do you market a movement?
Well, one of the things that you have to do when you're starting something is you have to also realize where people are at a particular place. In this country today, it's not difficult to start a movement because there are issues that everyone shares collectively. What has happened is that people are still sleeping in their beds comfortably, so it's still like, I don't like this. They're still talking at the TV. It's never really gotten to the place where they need to get out there. When we started, kids were being recruited off from their school campuses. Women were being raped repeatedly. Different things were happening. So when we got together, the most pressing thing was peace. We weren't talking about who was going to get which job, which warring faction was going to win. Everyone had a huge burden, and that burden was peace. And we started working around that word peace, and that was what people wanted to know. So 7 women in a room with $10 put out a statement, but we named ourselves. And that's something about starting a movement. I was just in Jordan where I was talking to a group of young people, and I said to them, a lot of the activism in the world today is lazy activism. You sit behind your computers, you use pseudonyms, no one knows who you are, you bash the word, you sign statements online, and you say we are activists. We named ourselves. The next day, every media outlet wanted to know who those crazy 7 women were.
With $10.
In Taylor's country, naming yourself, telling him immediate unconditional ceasefire, telling him dialoguing with the rebels, and telling him the deployment, 3 things that he has refused outrightly to do. You have to be crazy to put your name on these things. And once you do that, people tend to have confidence in your ability because you're not hiding behind something, you're putting yourself out there.
The visual impact, the women dressing in white, the message that sent to.
Our community was militarized. Guns, uniforms, colors of death, and we wanted to counter that. When you're doing a revolution or you're doing something to catch people, you can't be the same. You have to be different. So we stepped out in white, no shoes, no jewelry, nothing, just looking wretched, but with a lot of energy. Yeah.
Let's talk about something that was not visual, but was quite impactful. You all agreed on a sex strike. Explain how that worked.
Well, during the time we were doing this work, there's a lot of desperation when you're an activist. You want to see results. You want to see whatever you're doing, and we wanted peace. But we realized also that all of the men who were fighting had buddies, and the ones who were not involved in crisis had friends that they could talk to. So we decided, let's just do a sex strike. And most times people tend to think Muslim women are very calm and cool and collected. It was actually the Muslim woman in our group who raised the idea of a sex strike.
So what does that mean? Explain what you meant.
So we were withholding sex from the men so that they would begin to use their voice to talk to their buddies, to lay down their arms, that they would come and speak for our movement. Not that we needed them to speak for us, but they would speak for peace, And so it was like we're not having sex until the war ends.
And it worked.
In some communities. The rural women were smarter. They took their husbands into the churches and into the mosques and say, make an oath to God that you won't bother me for sex until we have peace. Wow. And then afterwards, no one could touch them. When we ended the war, had a peace agreement, we had to go around the country to end the mass action campaign. We went to the rural communities, and rural men had gifts and flowers. So I turned to one of the leaders and said, why are they celebrating you all like that? So, oh, tonight is going to be a lot of sex.
At the peace conference, you threatened to take off your clothes. Why?
I'll tell you one thing, and most times people ask me, in a country where women were raped, in a country where sexual violence were rampant, why do you think taking off your clothes at the peace talk would have made an impact? There is a difference when you're being raped. You're forced to do it. There's a difference when you decide in your sound mind that I will willingly give off my dignity in protest. And for me, that was the last shred of whatever dignity I had. If you're going to arrest me for preaching for peace, for fighting for justice, for fighting for ending the war, I was socialized to believe that the women would be protected, that communities would protect the weak. And if the quote-unquote powerful are sitting in there and they're distributing jobs and killing our people, and I'm out here without a gun, I'm going to not just protest this war, I'm going to protest the injustice of society and the double standard with which I was socialized. So I'm giving you the last shred of my dignity. That was the action that I was doing.
Your daughter here in the United States marched in the Women's March. And she came to you and worried that the movement would not translate into action. How did you counsel her?
Well, my daughter, that daughter, is the one born in February like me, and I tell everyone she's my stress. I had no clue that she had gone to the march. I knew she was at school. And then on this morning, I'm getting ready, January 22nd, she writes me this email. First, she calls me, Leymah. Leymah, I sent you a mail. Oh, my God. When I'm trying to fit in this dress and be slim, this child is now. So anyway, I sit down, read her email, and she's questioning everything that I hold dear, the feminist principles, the principles of justice and values and every other thing. And I said, I won't answer now. I came back home and I sat down and said to her, I wrote back to her to say, yes, it may look bleak, but there's hope. If I may bring it down to the US example, several years ago, the killers of Trayvon Martin walked away free. Several years later, Jordan Davis' killer would never see the light of day. Several years later, Black and brown people were shot and killed in alleys and no one knew about it. Today, everyone is speaking out about the killings of Black and brown people. Several years later, corporate rape would not see the light of day. Today is out there. Yes, it may seem bleak, but we're moving steps. And I can assure you that we are out here protesting, wearing the pussy hats, making all of the slogans. 10 years later, my daughter, you won't have to do it because you will be writing policies. I firmly believe that.
As Martin Luther King said, the arc of history bends towards justice. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't bend as quickly as we want it to, but it does bend toward justice.
And I can tell you for free, Nora, that's why I find myself in places and spaces, and I tell people I will use my voice even if it makes the president of whatever uncomfortable, because it is only in telling the truth, it is only in speaking our truth and living our truth and walking our truth and mobilizing for truth that we're ensuring that the next generation of women will not have to go through some of the crap that we've seen ourselves go through. Mm-hmm.
When you look at this country and what happened in Parkland, Florida, and the millennials, thousands walking out of school, protesting, raising their voices, do you see a different type of revolution there?
Well, the first when the Parkland shooting took place, like the Newtown shooting, I was outraged. I cried as a mother of 8 children. I felt so bad. And then all of the rest in peace and we feel what you feel, and then I see those children. Trust me, I got up and did an African dance. Thank God. Mm-hmm. When the adults are still speaking politics, there's a group of brave young people who refuse to sit behind their computers and use pseudonyms. I have so much respect for the Parkland children because while they're using social media, they're telling their leaders, we're bringing it home to you. And that's what activism is about. And that's what doing a revolution is about. And that's what making change is about. Once upon a time, we had an event at State Department, and it was the time before the second term of President Obama when there was so much conversation in the media in this country about birth control and reproductive rights of women. And I'll be watching TV and see men, all male panels talking about the reproductive health of women. And I couldn't get it because you can only talk about reproductive health if you're having your period. There's no way that you qualify if you haven't gone through any of this. And at that event, I said to the women of America, it's time for you to stop being politely angry. And what those young people have done is to show the adults in this country that we can no longer afford to be polite about gun violence, about rape, about abuse, about all of the negative things that has been happening in this country. We can no longer sweep it under the carpet whilst we are looking out there and telling the rest of the world, you do your politics this way. Those young people have taken America's dirt and put it in the forefront, and they're putting it in front of the adults and saying to them, clean it up or we will clean it up for you.
Leymah, tell us, what is a leader and what are the lessons you've learned?
Well, one of the things that I tell people is that a leader is not the person who stands or tweets. I just said that. Every morning. A leader is a person who journeys with his people. When I work with the women, one of the things that I realized made our movement successful is that I showed up first, and I was the last to leave. In places and spaces where they did not expect me to show up, I came there. I understood the struggle. No one was walking and I was driving in a car. I was in the forefront of the marches, even when the guns were in front of us. A leader is that person who really and truly decides we're doing this and will never rest until they see it come to an end. And the one thing that I would like to say is that around the world and in all of my travels, I've seen women in this country, outside of this country, show what true leadership is. Because a leader is that person who's selfless. I'm not letting go until I see what I'm looking for happen for these group of people. And in our world today, this is what we need. People who will take a step back and say, though I'm sleeping in a comfortable bed, but I'm not comfortable until someone else out there is comfortable. And for me, that's what I see leadership to be. Not bullying everyone into submission, not being negative, not going out there and saying things that you don't, not being divisive. A leader is that person who brings communities together. And I see it in a lot of women. And I would also like to say, in those young people from Parkland and all of the groups around this country that is taking activism outside and doing great things, that's great leadership. Leaders are the ones who will stand up and speak when no one else is willing to speak up.
Well, thank you for showing us how to start a revolution and reminding us how to be a leader. Leymah Gbowee.